This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Intruvix 2 Herbicide from FMC. Intruvix 2 Herbicide is an all-in-one formulation that gives you the best of both worlds, fast-burning activity and long-lasting systemic action for more consistent broadleaf control pre-seed to cereals. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 at Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. And speaking of the podcast, we're not only going to have a RealAg Issues bonus segment, we're also going to have a bonus of the bonus. We're going to have a beef market update today in the bonus version of the show here as well. We've got a product spotlight with Bayer Crop Science today. Troy Basaraba will be with us. And the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of CAPI. Got Lyndsey Smith and Kelvinn Heppner of RealAgriculture. We're going to break down all the biggest issues of the week, and there's a lot of them. We got a new nominee to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Prime Minister Carney. Very happy about that selection. We're going to talk about some of the big cuts at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as well as CFIA. What do we know about that, and what does it mean for the future of research and innovation when it comes to agriculture in Canada? Our panel will break that down and a whole lot more. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call or text the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Been a busy week. I am back from being in Minot, North Dakota for the most of the week, actually. And a great trip. And saw so many listeners of RealAg Radio. Really appreciate it. Next week, going to be in Cambridge, Ontario. CCAN soybean dealer event. Looking forward to that. Done that for a number of different years and really love talking to that group. And then on to CattleCon, Nashville, Tennessee. Hopefully the ice is gone by then and some of the wreckage that they have seen there in those parts. But looking forward to CattleCon is one of my favorite shows of the year. I wasn't able to go last year. Looking forward to being back this year at NCBA's big CattleCon convention. There's going to be ranchers and cattle feeders and industry people from across Canada, the U.S., and Mexico at that meeting. It is always a great one. Looking forward, especially when it's in Nashville. That just feels like where it always should be. There are San Antonio. Those are kind of like the natural fits for that meeting. Looking forward to it. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get started with the RealAg Issues Panel right after this. It's now time for a product spotlight with Grain Fox, joined right now by the CEO and founder, Mark Lepp.
So with Sanoa, what we've done is built an additional layer of supports. Really what it does then is helps both producers and agribusinesses dive deeper by asking questions and getting instant answers, really to help them understand what it all means for them specifically, and so that they can make better informed decisions.
What makes Sanoa different from some of those other things that producers are already using?
Unlike generic tools like a ChatGPT or something like that, Sanoa is built for ag using ag data. And really, like a generic, whether it's ChatGPT or other ones that are on the marketplace, they typically have a delay in the most recent information that it has access to, and Sanoa is live, it's current, and it's accurate.
So Mark, if somebody wants more information on Sanoa and the entire service offering that Grain Fox has for producers, where do they go?
You can go to grainfox.ca/RealAg and try it for yourself.
Thinking about Plant 2026, CDC Evident Durum from Alliance Seed is the clear choice with everything today's durum producers are looking for. High grain yield, strong disease resistance, and excellent end-use suitability. Built with resistance to leaf, stem, and stripe rust, along with protection against loose smut and common bunt, CDC Evident delivers the reliability and marketability growers need and the performance they expect. Learn more at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
Lots of issues to discuss here today on the RealAg Issues Panel on RealAg Radio. Again, thank you for joining us. The news does not sleep. It has been kind of that week. Also, as I mentioned, out on the road this week and trying to catch up on all of it. But our panel's going to do a great job. I know it. Joining us first, it is Kelvinn Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. How are we doing today, Kelvinn?
Doing well here, Shaun. It's we're still in the throes of winter here. A little bit of a reprieve from the extreme cold we had last week. We're only minus 21 as we speak right now, Celsius. So I'll let you do the math to convert that to Fahrenheit. But
still cold.
Yeah, sunny. Sky is bright blue and sunny and calm and cold.
The sun is fantastic. Like, it can be cold and sunny, just no wind. Like, the wind is what makes it miserable.
That's what we have today. It's a beautiful day. Beautiful winter day.
Yeah. Also joining us, Lyndsey Smith, Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how is the nation's capital?
Well, you know what? Not as bad as it was, I suppose. Although maybe it's all the hot air that joined this week as Parliament resumed sitting. It has not warmed up, though. Sitting just slightly warmer than Kelvin, but for Ontario, that basically means equivalent. And it has been busy. To be frank, and I feel like I'm still running to catch up from everything that's been going on and everything that's set to go on in the next few days and the next week. So looking forward to unpacking it all.
Yep, no doubt. Hey, have you been having trouble getting your Gulfstream 500
certified? Yeah, it's weird, right? I don't know what's happening.
The fuel lines want to freeze up, though, right?
Yeah, they do. They want to gel. So anyway, yeah.
Also joining us here today is Tyler McCann. He is the managing director at CAPI. How are we doing today, Tyler?
Doing well, Shaun. Great to be with you on a busy news week, and I'm curious if Lyndsey's running sustainable aviation fuel in that Gulfstream 500.
She better be.
Of course, I am.
You got to support the RealAg audience, right?
Domestically produced, or is it imported from Brazil?
No, this is only the best for my aviation vehicles. Yeah.
Do we have capacity to produce it in Canada?
I'll find a way.
The largest that's a good question. I was just going to say, but the largest producer of SAF in North America is in Great Falls, Montana. Montana Renewables.
Well,
I know
that's
that.
just across the border.
Is there canola going into it?
That's their intention.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That is their intention. That's why they're excited about growth of canola. Well, and there'll be some Canadian canola coming down there, but yeah, they are the largest, which I kind of just is sort of interesting that that's where it is, right? When you look at it. Okay. And if you are interested in biofuels, I don't know if we're going to get here to it today, but if you are interested in biofuels and some of the things that are happening regarding North American feedstocks and RINs and imported versus exported, all those kinds of things, I encourage you to check out Susan Stroud. Noble Ag was on the show on Wednesday for all of you biofuel geeks out there. Kelvin, I think we got to start with the cuts. We've seen substantial cuts at AAFC. We've seen substantial cuts at CFIA. I think many kind of describing these cuts as more than they thought we would see. And I guess we have limited information in terms of how all this pieces together. Give us the quick synopsis in terms of where we're at right now.
So right now, the dust is still settling in terms of details and figuring out which exact roles, people, positions, programs are being cut. But we do know that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is planning to close 7 of its facilities, 3 research and development centers at Guelph, Quebec City, and Lacombe, Alberta, a big one out west, and then 4 satellite research farms at Napan, Nova Scotia, Scott, Saskatchewan, Indian Head, Saskatchewan, and Portage la Prairie here in Manitoba. They are also looking to reduce their workforce at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada by approximately 665 positions. Over 1,000 employees, they'll receive these notification letters saying that they will be affected by this workforce reduction. So some of this has to do with negotiations still happening between the union and the employer, or whether staff want to take early retirement, what their different options are. So that's where some of the details have yet to be sorted. And the government has been slow to communicate this, as of course, politically, governments tend to not like to make these things public or make a bigger deal of them than they have to. That was last week that we learned all of those developments. This week, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency sent its letters and notification, held a all-staff meeting earlier this week where they informed staff that they are also going to be eliminating 587 positions within the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And so that's also significant. And CFIA is certainly with all of these cuts, there's often room for improvement or efficiencies to be gained. But CFIA is an agency that already runs at below what many would say is an optimal size workforce in terms of trying to get their mandate done. And so it'll be interesting to see where these cuts are and the impact that it has on food processing, on meat processing plants in Canada and all of that.
Lyndsey, what has kind of confused me, maybe I just don't understand the bigger picture here, but I don't understand when it comes to agriculture and agri-food cuts, why the minister hasn't been out in front of it and why they aren't controlling the narrative in terms of, okay, listen, this is what right-sizing government looks like and responsible fiscal management. Like you spin it that way and create a narrative around it, but not saying anything. I just think it leads to a whole bunch of people running around and speculating.
So, and we certainly have no shortage of that. And honestly, you're exactly right. I think if I could point out one sort of glaring omission, not just on this file, but just this Carney government, generally speaking, it seems very internal and really is not, or they really have dropped the ball on the comm side. Exactly that. This is not an easy conversation to have by any stretch of the imagination, but by not saying anything, you don't get to choose how it's framed. You basically leave it up to everybody else. And Amber Bell was at the Crossroads conference this week. She was asking people about what they thought, what they had heard. And there were several people who said they were still waiting to hear from AAFC counterparts for some clarification on some of these things, and they had got nothing. So it's not even that they're not publicly talking. They're also not privately talking necessarily. And a lot of the coverage that we've done, we had to fight pretty hard. Kelvin wrote many an email and made plenty of phone calls to actually get some official numbers as opposed to just sort of what was out in the ether. So let's face it, like we recognize that, as a country, we have some serious budget decisions to make. Carney is making those budget decisions. They're not going to be popular. This isn't the first time we've had to have cutbacks in AAFC or other departments, but we can certainly compare and contrast this to, say, the 2012 cuts and see how they were handled, and there just doesn't seem to be nearly enough comms on this at all.
Tyler, I guess, how would you evaluate all this? Do you see it as smart fiscal management into the austerity narrative that we've been hearing from the Prime Minister, or is this a gutting of innovation and research programs?
We don't know. There's not enough information for me to actually answer that question, Shaun. I think it could be either or. And for context, again, I was in the minister's office during those 2012 cuts, so I got a kind of a sense of how these things unfold behind the scenes. But the reality is that there is a need to revamp the way science is done in agriculture and agri-food Canada. I think that many of the people that are now decrying science cuts 3 months ago would have talked about how disconnected Canada's science branches and how there was a need for change. And the reality is a lot of what we've seen over the last couple of years is that there hasn't been huge stakeholder support for investments in Canada public science. And I think everybody's kind of got their little pockets. That it depends on how closely connected you are to your research site. But I think we've really gotten into this world where we've taken public science for granted, and now we're dealing with the consequences. But we wrote in an op-ed that was that you guys published for us on Monday that there's a need to renew Ag Canada science, and the problem is we just don't know if Ag Canada's actually taken that choice, and it does speak to this vacuum that we're in, where they are not out telling a story about this is what the future is going to look like, and so I hope that this is a good news. I hope this is about fiscal prudent management and getting better outcomes and doing more with less and kind of making other changes that are there. But there's just no sign of that yet.
The reaction quickly from farm groups, Kelvin, has been we're disappointed, very concerned. They seem to be reacting from a very negative standpoint. I'm not sure I'm surprised by that, but that's just the reaction we've seen from farm groups.
Yeah, and many individual farmers too, and there's also this message that people are taking out of this, that this is government placing less importance on agriculture going forward. And of course, there are all kinds of studies over the years of the return on investment of public research in agriculture, how it can yield multiple results, but often in the real long term. And that's where people feel that this is government sacrificing that. Of course, the debate and the devil in the details lies in discussing what should be funded and what shouldn't. And I think, like Tyler said, many people feel often that public research isn't the most relevant research, or that public funds should be managed more fiscally responsibly, that type of thing. And so how do you make those two things jive? How do you prioritize funding certain things and cutting elsewhere, that type of thing? That's what the Carney government is. And we should note, agriculture is not the only department or part of the government that is seeing these cuts. Many other departments are also receiving these notices here over the last couple of weeks. We haven't covered them as in depth. Of course, they're not within our what's relevant to our audience as directly, but it's not just agriculture that's being singled out here. But yeah, it's tough, and until we have more details, a lot of these farm groups work specifically with certain researchers or research facilities, and so they have that personal connection as well, and that certainly plays into all of this as well. There's definitely a human angle to this too, as these are researchers that we know as well, and we are there in our thoughts as they have difficult decisions to make.
I did have some DC policy friends that said, did Elon Musk move to Canada? What's going on up there?
But Shaun, part of the problem is that we don't actually know what the cuts are. Like this is.
Well, that gets back to my point about I would get out in front of it.
But people have been really focused on the site closures. But government has said that just because the site is closing doesn't mean all of the research programs are closing. Right. They've talked about the need to transfer. I think that there's a sense that in Lacombe there will be 100 positions eliminated. That still means there's 550 positions. Other places, we don't have a clear articulation of where those are. And we also don't know what the program cuts are. And so when the budget announcement was made in November, kind of half the cuts are coming from FTE reductions, but half the cuts are coming from program reductions. And there's been no articulation whatsoever as to what the program cuts are beyond living labs. That was referenced in the budget.
Right.
But I think that we get too fixated on they're closing a site, and we've kind of lost the forest for the trees. We don't actually know what's happening beyond that.
And Lyndsey, I'm going to get your thoughts after we got to take a break. I just want to point out that we saw the same thing reaction from U.S. farmers to the USDA cuts earlier in 2025. I wanted government cuts and right sizing of government, but I didn't mean here. I meant over there, right? And that's kind of the reaction that we have seen here in the last couple of weeks. Hey, get instant answers to your grain marketing questions 24/7. Sanoa is your AI grain market analyst, available anytime to help you understand prices, basis, and market trends so you can act with confidence. I love confidence. You got to have confidence. Start a free trial and unlock RealAg listener savings at grainfox.ca/RealAg. RealAg Issues Panel back right after this.
Introducing a new supergroup in your fields, a Vireo herbicide from FMC. The first product in Western Canada to combine Group 27 and Group 14 actives, a Vireo herbicide delivers powerful, broad-spectrum burn-off control of early-season broadleaf weeds, including resistant kochia, cleavers, and volunteer canola. This rising star in burn-off innovation works in all soil zones and can be applied pre-seed or up to 3 days post-seeding. Ask your retailer about new Vireo herbicide from FMC.
While some cereal growers believe a pre-seed or spring application of Paradigm-Free herbicide is better, others think you get more from a fall application. But what they both agree on is the exceptional broadleaf control of Paradigm-Free, the convenience of being able to apply in cooler conditions, and its role as an effective resistance management tool. Paradigm-Free, eliminate tough broadleaf weeds before they can become bigger problems. Talk to your local retailer today.
Time to get excited about your fields again thanks to Excite Bio Yield Plus. It's a phosphate solubilizing ag biological that works on oilseeds, cereals, and legumes. For 15 years, we've been helping farmers achieve healthier plants and higher yields with our premium liquid inoculants. For more information on Excite Bio Yield Plus or one of our other premium products, call 1-855-948-3246 or visit excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca. At Excite Bio, inoculants and ag biologicals, it's all we do.
It's now time for a product spotlight here on RealAg Radio with Bayer Crop Science. We're joined by Bayer's Technical Solutions agronomist based out of Brandon, Manitoba. It is Troy Basaraba. How are we doing today, Troy?
Doing good, Shaun. How's yourself?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. We are in the thick of winter. Absolutely. And lots happening and a lot of planning ahead for 2026 season. You know, what are we seeing across the prairies in regard to herbicide resistance with cereal crops? I've said in a number of different presentations, the weeds are winning. What are your thoughts?
You know what? It's a problem that's just not going away, unfortunately, right? And yeah, even though we're staring at snowbanks right now and brutally cold temperatures, now is kind of the time to kind of sit back and think about what's going on. And so when you start thinking about herbicide resistance, like I said, it's a problem that's not going away. It's bringing new challenges to us across the prairies, right? Numerous years ago, wild oats was kind of like the big scary boogeyman. Lately, it seems like kochia is kind of the one that's really kind of rocketed up to the front of things. And so we're seeing shifts on that standpoint, but we're also kind of seeing shifts within because, it wasn't that long ago that kochia was just glyphosate resistant, but now we're seeing multiple resistance to glyphosate. We're seeing the spread of it happen, at a pretty rapid rate. The group 14 stuff, resistant, that's the new thing on the radar here now, and it's moving pretty quick. So there's lots of challenges, and unfortunately they're not going away. So we got to start planning for them, year after year.
Yeah, the problems are increasing. I wish the solutions were as well, but that doesn't seem to be really the case here. But what are the implications? You mentioned planning. So what are the implications of planning when it comes to that early weed control in your cereal crop?
You know what? I've always said you get one chance to get a crop out of the ground and get going, right? And there's tons of data out there to suggest that, those first few weeks of a plant coming out of the ground sets the stage for a lot of what's going to happen on the back end and the yield of it, right? So in terms of the implications of early weed control, like anything that you can do to manage to manage those weeds early on so that you can get the crop out of the ground and get it off to a good start is just going to set you up for success down the road, right? So bad analogy maybe, but think about it from a football standpoint. Okay. You got a running back on a football team, right? What does he want to do? He wants to make yards, but think of weeds as the defensive line and the linebackers. So if you've got an incredible defensive line and linebackers, that running back is not going to get through there. So he's not going to be able to make yards. He's not going to have a lot of success. However, early weed control is like having an incredible offensive line that takes care of that defensive line, that it's going to allow that running back to blow through it, to get set up, to establish, to get yards. So it's all about trying to make as much success for your crop earlier on with that, right?
Yeah. Well, I like a good football analogy. I'm not going to complain whatsoever, Troy. I like it. Okay, I think that's good. I think it exactly sets the stage what we're up against here. So what tools do we have access to when it comes to fighting herbicide resistance in our cereals?
There is a pile of different approaches that we can take under the umbrella of a whole integrated weed management strategy, right? There's crop rotations. There is cultural practices like seeding rates and time of seeding, all that other sort of stuff. And then there's where companies like where Bayer come in, where we come in from the crop protection side of things as kind of like as another pillar to help you in that. And I think the best way to do that is to incorporate kind of everything and bring it all into one. And again, this is where we get back to where we talk about planning, right? Plan for now to use multiple different strategies. And it's anything that we can do to keep balance off weeds or keep the weeds off balance, so to speak, is going to work in our favor, right? Mother Nature is great at figuring us out. It's kind of like my wife. She figured me out a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
Now she knows how to work me, right? Mother Nature's kind of the same way. So anything that we can do to kind of offset that. I remember Hugh Becky years ago saying that he was speaking to a group of growers and he asked the guys like, what's working for you right now? And they said something and he said, okay, stop doing that and then go do something else to try and keep weeds off balance, right? So this is where, and again, going back to herbicide resistance and setting your cereal crops up, this is where like a good pre-burn really comes into play as part of that strategy, right? Keeping weeds off balance. I think the days of a Roundup or glyphosate only pre-burn, I think are done. Yeah. I think we need to look at pre-burns with multiple modes of actions to go after some of these new resistant weed species that are out there, right?
Do you think that sometimes we're very focused on the here's the 3 or 4 tactics and we need to sort of up it, like, and have a bit of a, you mentioned the word strategy. I think that's an important component. And sticking with your football analogy, you could have a whole bunch of plays offensively, but maybe they're not connected to each other. We need to make sure we have an offensive game plan where those plays tie together and they have purpose in terms of how they relate to each other and how each of those tactics kind of feeds into the other, right? I think that's a critical component of this, to stick with your football analogy.
Yeah, you know what, it's like I said, you can have that great offensive line, but if you have that one weak link on that offensive line that allows a defender to break through, even though you have 4 out of 5 defenders, taken care of, that 5th one can still make a damage. And that's kind of the case like with herbicide resistance, right? So you need something that's going to make sure you got all your bases covered to do that, right?
Yeah, great point. Hey, Troy, if somebody wants more information, where do they go?
Lots of different things. Your local retailers and local agronomists have lots of information. A company like ourselves with Bayer, lots of field staff with lots of expertise. The website that we have, Bayer Crop Science website, lots of good information, stuff like that. So just reach out. There's lots of good people that'll have lots of good info for you.
Awesome stuff. Troy, you can come on the show anytime. If you're going to bring more football analogies, more football talk, I'm all for it. Look forward to chatting with you again.
Awesome. Thanks. Great to have you.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, we'll be back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147 after this quick break.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burn down.
Since 2009, the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has been providing relevant and timely agronomic advice to anyone involved in canola production. With over 15 years of video content on YouTube, the Canola School has been producers' go-to source for canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. The Canola School is brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola. Check us out on YouTube or at canolaschool.com.
With deep roots in agriculture, M&P's farm management consulting team helps farm businesses make confident decisions for long-term success. From strategic planning to operational growth, M&P advisors across Canada guide farms through challenges and opportunities. Connect with M&P today to build a stronger future for your farming operation. Learn more at mmp.ca. We've got Kelvinn, Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, Real Agriculture, as well as Tyler McCann. He's the managing director at CAPI. Lyndsey, let's go back to you. Your thoughts on these cuts?
Well, and so I want to tie it into a discussion that happened yesterday with the webinar that we had with CAPI that Tyler moderated and I was on as well. So to pick up from Tyler's point is that exactly that. These cuts, whether they're CFIA, AAFC, different departments, whatever, they aren't just staff or locations, right? So some of it would be program changes, some of it, but it is easiest to sort of focus on the actual research stations because they're a physical place and people know them, et cetera. We do know that some of the researchers will potentially move to other sites. That'll probably take a while to actually figure out because these are, again, real life people with lives and careers, and they've got to make decisions as well. But it will take some time before we really know what we're looking at. One of the things, though, is that to the point of, a site, a physical bricks and mortar land, et cetera, these are expensive things to keep running and have on the books, et cetera. And when you're looking at ways to save money, it does seem like a pretty straightforward place to potentially free up some capital or get some things off the budget lines, right? So the real question really is, okay, now what? And to Tyler's point of how do we continue to do what is staying? Because there are plenty of programs that are still continuing. How do we continue those programs in an intelligent way, in an efficient way, et cetera? And one of the things, so yesterday we had the Outlook webinar with CAPI, and Greg Meredith sort of pointed to, you've got to adopt technology, you've got to do things smarter, you've got to be more efficient, et cetera. And I agree with all of that, except for that, it requires likely more collaboration than maybe we've entirely seen. And technology takes an investment of both money into adopting the tech and then the training. So just to say like, hey, we need more tech, we need more, like all of those things, that's great. And I completely agree. But there also has to be, and this comes back to Shaun, to your point on the positioning, there has to be like a clear plan and an articulated plan as to how we're going to do this. And it's my hope we'll get that, but that to me is what we need here of here's our plan of, yes, we're making these cuts, but here's what we're going to continue to do and here's how. And my biggest concern is probably CFIA on that one, to be honest.
I'm not sure that there is that plan at this point. I think the plan is to hit the targets, hit the spending reduction targets. That's the overarching goal here. And so it revolves around that, not necessarily having a strategic plan after that.
And it's, I think important context for people to remember is that this is not something that has happened overnight. The Prime Minister was elected on a mandate to reduce spending. Yes. Ministers were given direction last summer to come up with savings. Ministers submitted those plans into central agencies in September, and the budget was announced in November. And so I do kind of struggle with the fact that this has been going on for so long that we don't have that plan. I think that there are two concrete things that the ministers could do, that the agriculture minister could do on the science cuts in particular. One is they need to start that process around what does renewal look like. I think that they should be asking kind of 5 smart people to come up with a better plan to make bigger changes and make this about more than just the sites in particular. And 2, I think that the federal minister and his provincial counterparts need to agree that innovation is actually going to be a major pillar, a central plank of the next 5-year policy framework. I think that would send a signal that they're serious about this. And I think on the food safety side at CFIA, I really do worry that there's like a major underestimation of the food safety cuts. When we made changes in 2012, that was just after we had gone through some pretty significant recalls. There was a huge focus on inspector numbers. I think at the time that those cuts were made, the minister went out and very clearly communicated the steps that were being taken and how those cuts were being done in a way to keep food safe. I haven't seen that in a kind of a big way this time, and I really think that they need to up their game around this is how we're protecting the food system. Keeping in mind that I don't think it's not a huge story, but CFI is also changing its organizational structure that may also make things better for ag stakeholders, ag exporters, ag businesses, may also make things worse. And so we need to also pay attention to what's going on at CFI.
I had a RealAg listener reach out this week, and they are a very conservative person. But their opinion was they supported what the Carney government was doing in these cuts because their opinion is that we got to break some shit. And it would be very Canadian to have this like perfect plan and and then take 10 years to put that all together. And this is like, let's bust it up and let's build from it. But that is not something we typically, it's a little bit uncomfortable in Canada because it's not typically the way that something that we see a lot of. And so his was like, listen, I didn't vote Liberal, but I'm on board with this because I think this gets into the act. If you're in the action camp, you're like, this is action. And go ahead, Tyler.
And Shaun, it's not just those conservative listeners that are saying that. So we did an interview a year ago when we put out a report on how to approach fiscal restraint inside government. As part of the work that we did, we interviewed, had some dialogue with a bunch of former senior deputy ministers, senior officials. And when kind of lifelong career bureaucrats are telling you sometimes you've got to just move fast and break things, it tells you that the system needs change, right? Like that is the status quo is not defensible. Government needs to work differently. Changes need to be made. But what I worry is that we've seen the cuts. We haven't seen the changes yet in how government's going to work.
Now, I want to get back to the webinar here, but first, Kelvin, one of the things that I've been picking up on here this morning is, like, I've been giving presentations across Canada and the U.S., pretty steady here for the past 3 months. And when I'm talking to American farmer audiences, there is a big embracement of the weak U.S. dollar policy because it is advantageous for American exports. Okay, and there's a lot of crop supply out there, and so this is one of the things that could be used to combat Brazil in the corn and bean market. We saw this morning President Trump, his selection his nominee to replace Jerome Powell as the chair of the Federal Reserve, and he is a proponent. One, he's very hawkish on inflation, and 2, he also is a proponent of a tight Fed balance sheet, which means a restricting of liquidity out there in the money supply. That is not necessarily pro a weakened dollar. And so all of a sudden the narrative's kind of flipped here a little bit. We may not see as weak of US dollar as we thought we were even yesterday.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision that he made, an announcement in terms of picking Kelvin Warsh, because a lot of his positions, while he has the central casting looks that Trump alluded to, a lot of his positions, at least historically, maybe not as recently, but a lot of Warsh's positions when it comes to policy seem to contradict a lot of Trump's publicly stated goals, mainly, like you said, that he doesn't necessarily think lower rates are the right move, that the balance sheet of the Fed should be smaller and tighter money supply, that the U.S. dollar ultimately, these are all policies that would make the U.S. dollar worth more. And so, yeah, like you said, not necessarily a devaluing of the U.S. dollar that markets were expecting. And that's one of the reasons why we saw, when I checked this morning, gold, for example, down 3-4%. And silver down even more. I think silver was down almost 10% on this news, because people had been moving assets into those metals because of concerns that the U.S. dollar was going to continue to depreciate, and that this is kind of a reversal of that. So, yeah, an interesting pick. At the same time, we saw producer price index numbers out today from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and showed inflation at the factory gate in the U.S. above what was expected. So inflation remains an issue. PPI, I think it was up 3% year over year in December. Expectations were for lower than that. So there will be some pressure there to continue to push for lower interest rates, certainly politically as well. And we'll have a lot to be determined here, whether he sticks with his old positions or whether he moves more in line with what Trump has said he wants to see out of the Federal Reserve chair. And certainly, I don't think it's good news personally for the Federal Reserve to become political, or that it should maintain its independence for the sake of markets.
Well, people expecting him to be dovish maybe in the short term, but where if we get past, say, 2 rate cuts. And we saw the Fed hold on rates earlier this week, which would be the last meeting for Chairman Powell, I believe. So, yeah, and there's a confirmation hearing and all that kind of stuff that still has to happen. And Senator Tillis has some pretty strong views on whether or not he will support the candidate or not at this point, based on some of the activity at the DOJ. Lyndsey, I know you talked economics on the webinar yesterday. Your favorite thing, I love it. I just love this that you did this. This is what I guess. What was your pull away in talking to the FCC economist?
Right. So it was Des Sobel with FCC joined the webinar yesterday, and thank you, Tyler, for letting me navigate the economics discussion. It was actually very interesting, as much of a hard time as I give to such things. So Des touched on several different things. Trade, of course, and so where Canada is sitting as far as diversifying trade, but of course touching on just how large our trade with the U.S. continues to be and will continue to be. So a balanced sort of look there. We also talked about GDP. We talked a bit about interest rates, and of course this currency question. So Shaun, that whole discussion of the U.S. dollar obviously impacts our Canadian dollar, and what does a lower or higher Canadian dollar mean for Canadian agriculture? Because, of course, certain segments really benefit from a lower dollar. But then overall, some people might say, well, a stronger Canadian dollar means as a country, we're doing better. And that is often the case. So Des did bring up, though, some really interesting points about how globally, though, the Canadian dollar is weaker than a lot of other currencies. And
relative to the U.S. dollar.
Right. And that's not good news. Like for our own reasons, our GDP growth is pretty sad and things aren't great. And so the Canadian dollar is weak on its own merit. And that's concerning, although it does potentially mean it keeps us, more competitive on a global scale for agriculture goods. So lots of moving parts there, but definitely one of the things we probably don't talk enough about is what is happening with currency and those currency trends, and what it actually means sort of as we move forward on trade.
Yeah, I think it's important for the audience to remember, just because we say weaker or stronger U.S. dollar, that don't do the inverse for the Canadian dollar, because it's Canadian dollar relative to the U.S. dollar, and then how that floats relative to other currencies around the world. If the U.S. dollar is weak and the Canadian dollar follows it, and we don't see like a big change in that 72, 73 cent range, big time export boom potentially, because our goods are much more affordable on the world stage. That Fendt tractor, though, that's manufactured in Europe, she's going to be a lot more expensive if that's your taste when it comes to importing farm machinery equipment. We got to take a break. We've got more RealAg Radio coming up right after this.
Whether you're running a farm operation, in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, operating a company in agri-food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag and food together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Calgary on March 8th, 9th, and 10th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
As you look ahead to the next growing season, there's a lot to consider when it comes to your crop. You need every possible advantage available to you. The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to make the best choice for you and your farm. On-demand videos with leading industry experts, available anywhere, anytime. Go into the season confident and ready with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
Continuing with the RealAg Issues Panel here on RealAg Radio, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, as well as Tyler McCann, who's the Managing Director at CAPI. CDC Evident Durum from Alliance Seed is the clear choice for plant 2026. It delivers high grain yield, strong disease resistance, and excellent end-use suitability. With CDC Evident, you'll set a new standard for durum performance. Learn more at allianceseed.com or call 877-270-2890. Lyndsey, when you're choosing a variety, those are like criteria you need to be paying attention to.
Super important. I actually really love that we get ads for new varieties because I'm always curious what's new and exciting. And I'm just putting it out there for anyone thinking about naming new varieties. I love to be consulted. I love naming things. So just give me a call.
You're quite good at it.
Yeah, thank
you.
I think
it's just an opportunity to point out that it's going to be really important that we figure out how do we keep producing new varieties at a time when Canada's pulling back its footprint. So we did.
We don't really have an indication though how any of this impacts public plant breeding though, Tyler.
No, other than Indian head is.
And apparently there's talk that they're going to transfer that to Outlook instead. But I think the bottom line is like even if breeding programs at Ag Canada continue on, this is not a sustainable solution. Producers cannot think that they can continue to rely on this. So we had a discussion with Jason Reinheimer that I think is out or will be out soon through the RealAg channels, talking about his view for a different idea, different way of doing that. But man, that's a conversation that needs to happen if farmers want to keep getting access to new plant varieties.
I look forward to growing AC Lyndsey.
But spelled incorrectly. Yeah, spelled with a Y. And so no one will be able to Google it because they'll all spell it wrong. So...
Curious, Kelvin, what do you think that the characteristics of AC Lyndsey will be?
Well, it would obviously
definitely short stature.
Yeah,
short.
I was going to say, not semi-dwarf, fully dwarf. Just teeny.
Is there a way to have like a loud variety?
Oh, maybe it's like a flashy color. That would be
really bright yellow.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway. Yeah, okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm taking notes.
It has great standability because it's very stubborn.
Short, strong, straw. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you think she would? Do you think she would be a public variety though, Kelvin? Like you're going at AC.
I'm right here. You could ask me.
Depends on the future of Ag Canada's involvement.
Yeah, depends if there is one. Anyway.
Yeah. I was talking to a farmer from Montana this week when I was in Minot at the Northern Pulse Grower meeting, and he had mentioned that he was a seed grower, and he had mentioned that he had toured recently the CDC facility in Saskatoon and was incredibly impressed with that facility. So that's one of the neat things. You get in the northern tier in Western Canada, there's a lot of research and variety development that really crosses that border indeed. Okay, Tyler, we're going to get to a food topic. The Prime Minister made an announcement this week regarding food. We should probably talk about that since it involves agriculture. What did he say?
So the Prime Minister, addressing some domestic affordability issues, kind of had a two-tier announcement. The big kind of headline piece that got mainstream news was an increase to the GST tax credit that they are calling the new Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit. So for low-income Canadians, they'll get more of a rebate than they used to. I think just highlights how much of an affordability issue, or how much of an issue affordability is for politicians continues to drive focus. This is kind of, if the Prime Minister is going to talk about agriculture issues when he's not in China, this is probably going to be how he's talking about it and thinking about it. But as beyond that, he also announced a couple of other things, including $500 million that they've set aside to deal with the cost of supply chain disruptions without passing the costs on to Canadians at the checkout line. Shaun, I'm not sure I've heard anybody be able to articulate what does that actually mean or what does that look like.
I was just going to ask you, what the heck is that?
Don't know. There's also a $150 million food security fund for small and medium enterprises and organizations that support them. Also, not entirely clear what that is. They're going to allow immediate expensing for greenhouse buildings. That is at least a clear. And then a commitment to a national food security strategy that strengthens domestic food production and improves access to food, affordable, nutritious food. I'll just say that when you think about the root cause of food insecurity being low incomes, I'm not sure that a national food security strategy is really what the focus should be, but this could maybe have impacts for Canadian farmers, and it's important to be aware of it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, here are a bunch of pink slips in an envelope for meat plant inspectors and inspection people. That wasn't part of the PM.
That was Kelvinn's paraphrasing at the end. Also, I did want to point out.
It's contradictory.
Exactly.
All I'm highlighting.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that this. So we started this conversation talking about comms and talking about framing. I mean, talking about, so this is actually a brilliant move. If you're the government and you have a lame thing called the GST tax credit, which is the government sales tax credit, rename it to something, grocery affordability, of course, like sign me up. So there's an example.
Something which doesn't have GST on it in the first place, right?
Anyway, yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's just branding. But look, they are capable of like messaging and changing things and creating things. They just apparently are only doing it on this. So.
But that framing piece applies on the other side, where if agriculture stakeholders want to get more action, more attention to government, they should be thinking about how can what they're talking about be framed as a food security, affordability issue, right? And I think that, again, we're always a little bit late to that game. The vast majority of Canadians don't care too much about Canadian farmers, but they do care a lot about how much food costs, and we need to be more aware of that and think about that.
Yeah, affordability is the focus for the Trump administration and for the Carney government. Everything right now is, and I'm not criticizing that at all. That's just very apparent. It's all about affordability and how that is tackled. And does that happen through, providing people with more money to be able to afford those things, which Kelvin would probably say drives inflation up? We saw that during the pandemic. Or is it done through trying to stimulate productivity and production, and from that angle? And time will tell on which angles people take. Kelvin, go ahead.
That's where Warsh's appointment as Federal Reserve Chair, I think, is favorable, or gives me some optimism in terms of he's a supply side policy guy where he favors productivity and increasing you increase supply to combat inflation rather than, like you said, hand out stimulus to that drives further demand and creates further inflation.
And Prime Minister Carney, very complimentary of the Warsh selection.
Yeah, exactly.
Very complimentary.
They probably,
I was going to say, closer to home, the reality is affordability is also the reason why Pierre Poilievre looks like he will sail through his leadership vote later today in Calgary, right? His ability to articulate a compelling message that seems to have Canadians, or at least, again, a fairly significant share of Canadians supportive of what they're doing. And so it's interesting to see how that plays into his support that he'll get at the leadership convention, but then how Carney is trying to respond through things like this to take the issue away from him.
So if we have a federal election, whenever that is, and this announcement earlier this week on affordability from Carney kind of created some stir that potentially there is an election around the corner, because that's when politicians talk about this stuff or bring this, remember Trudeau's GST holiday last year as one of his last actions as well, or I guess it was just over a year ago. That's, to me, if we have a federal election around affordability, that's certainly in the Conservatives' favor. If it's about Trump and international geopolitics, that's where Carney stands strong. And so can we actually have an election about affordability, or will, to me, that's where the Liberals right now and Prime Minister Carney potentially can always poke the bear south of us if he wants to turn the election into something about Trump. And my concern is that if we have an election, that's what it turns into no matter what, because that's what the incumbent party wins on.
I mean, I always think it's interesting, Shaun. You've got kind of two ways to look at things. You can look at what the Prime Minister is doing as standing up for Canadian interests, or you can be like Kelvin and look at what the Prime Minister is doing as poking the bear for political
There's both
advantage.
short-term and long-term.
Yeah.
Sometimes, well, exactly. Is it for the short-term or long-term benefit of the country? That's the question he's got to ask. And I give Carney credit. In a lot of cases, he has more of a long-term perspective than most politicians. The vast majority of politicians, especially our most previous Prime Minister. But for an electoral political advantage in an election campaign, a lot of long-term thinking gets thrown out the window, Tyler.
Yeah, it's hard because what we've seen, and we saw it again this week, there was a poll that came out on Monday based on what Carney's been doing the past 2 weeks. His popularity is increasing. And so it's like this weird dynamic where the more fighting, or the harsher the tension is between Trump and Carney, the more Canadians like Carney, which potentially works against the economic interests of
the country.
It's backwards. It's very confusing. So I'm not saying right or wrong. It's just like, what a weird dynamic.
But I think one of the loudest voices about standing up for Canadian interests has been Stephen Harper on this. And so I know that there's a lot of Conservatives that are kind of harping against Mark Carney and the approach that he's taking. But I think Stephen Harper has been one of the loudest voices to say, look, he would do whatever is needed. He would make Canada poorer in order to maintain our sovereignty. And so, kind of never mind what the current Prime Minister is saying. I think if you go back to what Stephen Harper is saying, that's a pretty clear message that I think that we should be aware of.
Yeah, easy, but that is really easy when you're the past Prime Minister. You don't have to face the political consequences. Like, I get it, but Carney's got a tough path here. Like, I heard this morning on Bloomberg Radio, a Canadian living in New York, political think tank. He described it as Carney's really between a rock and a hard place here. He has a real massive challenge in front of him. And we're at a time where we're seeing, again, this divergence. What we saw last year in the summer, which is Mexico is a different relation with the U.S. than Canada is. And for some reason, it's easier to have harsher relationships with Canada than it is with President Sheinbaum in Mexico. And I know, Lyndsey, you talked to Goldie Hyder. I encourage everybody. That was Monday's show. I encourage everybody to go back and listen to that.
Yeah, it was also recorded last Friday, which was important to timestamp because, of course, the weekend was full of this 100% tariff rhetoric. How dare you, Canada? I do think Carney has, at least in some way, has sort of addressed this, right? Of framing this discussion with China as, we don't have a free trade deal with China. We're not pursuing a free trade deal with China. We were solving some trade issues. And so, like, the discussion, though, with Goldie really does, and from his perspective, what I find fascinating, and I'm always open to hear sort of what is the latest, is that his position, and especially going down to Washington, meeting his counterparts there, but also meeting with lawmakers in the U.S., is this sense of, like, the CUSMA USMCA deal, for the most part, works, and people want it reviewed, renewed, we move on. But there are still pinch points that we are going to have to address. However, the parties on each side are willing to do that, at least at like the actual ground level. It's all going to come down to negotiations and the political side that really could get in the way. Like, it feels like to me, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you guys heard something different, that like the wherewithal from the Canadian industry, from the U.S. industry is there to see this deal renewed.
Yeah.
On maybe not exactly the timeline, but like on a decent timeline. And it really will be the political stuff that gets in the way. So how do we manage that?
Well, and I know that people like Tyler want to always focus on, they want to focus on Danielle Smith and is she doing things in the best interest of Canada? But I'll point I think one of the issues that Carney has is Doug Ford and his over-the-top theatrics, and what is he willing to accept as these negotiations go on, and we try to sort out what actually is the strategic advantage of the auto sector from a North American perspective. Those are harsh questions that got to be answered.
But I think, Shaun, what we've seen is Canadians effectively answered that in the last election, right? They had a choice of electing a prime minister that stands up for Canadian interests and defends Canada, or electing a prime minister that rolls over and puts Canada kind of at the feet of the Americans. I know you and others may like to put Canada at the feet of the US, but I think that there's this growing course of people that say, no, like we have our own long-term economic interests and sovereignty at stake, and we can't put that at risk.
I would like to just point out that we need some sort of disclaimer as to when people are being cheeky, because there's a lot of cheekiness going on in these few minutes. And for those who can't see our faces, we are serious, but also not serious.
Oh, we're taking shots. We're taking shots.
We're taking shots.
I do think this one, and I don't know if Kelvin was going to go there with his comment when he got cut off, but Canada needs to calm down. Mm-hmm. Less over the top. And a part of this is some of the people that are in the media at the Globe and Mail and some political commentators I see on X. Everybody chill out. And we don't need to have this allergic reaction to anything that some people in the cabinet say or the president says. Chill out. Honestly, there's sometimes I think we actually look a little bit silly in how we're reacting to some of this as Canadians. But that's my thought.
I agree. We got to look at the actual real constraints in reality when it comes to the political system in the U.S. and that type of thing. And what the president posts on Truth Social increasingly is less relevant than what happens in reality, because he's making so many threats that aren't being followed through on.
Pay attention to what Secretary Bessent says is what I think is wise. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here today. Really appreciate it. I think some of us are going to be in a bonus. I think we're going to get rid of Tyler and kick him out of here. But everybody have yourselves a great weekend. Hey, Tyler, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Great to be with you, Shaun.
Oh, good stuff. We like poking each other. Kelvin and Lyndsey, all the best.
Thank you. Stay warm, everyone.
Yeah, no kidding. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Intruvix 2 Herbicide from FMC. Intruvix 2 Herbicide for cereals delivers outstanding control of the toughest broadleaf weeds like volunteer canola, narrow-leaved hawksbeard, and kochia. See your local retailer for more information today.
Okay, we are back here in the bonus of RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and Tyler McCann. At the back end of the we got like a double bonus today. At the back end of the bonus of the bonus is going to be the beef market update here today with Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Okay, Tyler, I found you not very nice to the host today, and the host would like to say the producer and I have talked. We feel thin-skinned, and we're upset.
The same person.
Well, that sounds like a pretty Canadian approach, Shaun, to be a little thin-skinned and upset. I guess the good news for you is that I'm not going to be able to stay for the entire bonus, but I want to go back to just to say, if you have the great webinar that we did, and maybe it was because Lyndsey was kind of co-hosting that with me. I'm not sure if that was it. Might it?
She can do it from now on. Hey, wait a minute. No, it was my 10-minute segment on how the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index and how farmers are feeling about things.
But people should listen when this appears in the kind of the podcast stream, or go onto YouTube and watch the video. But like, it is fair to say, when you look at kind of from an economic perspective, from that farm sentiment perspective, from a policy or political perspective, we covered all those bases yesterday. This CUSMA piece really just is what is going to dominate 2026. And I know we keep talking about it. I know we can talk about people that are overreacting, but it is hard. I mean, I think it's hard for everybody to do their job when this is changing all of the time. Kind of the way people are reacting, whether or not it's overreacting or not, it is just looms so large in everything. And I think I'm continuing to be a bit skeptical that governments, especially in the agriculture context, are well positioned to respond and put this in the context of the cuts in this work that they're going to do in the policy framework. I hope that we see people take this threat seriously and the potential harm to the Canadian ag sector seriously. But I don't know, Lyndsey, I didn't get a sense yesterday that there was a lot of optimism that we were well prepared or able to react or respond.
Well, I'll throw a wedge in here. I saw John Manley did an interview where he said that Canada will be fine without CUSMA.
So I fundamentally disagree. I mean, would Canada exist without CUSMA? Sure.
Would
we be
yes.
fine? No. So those are two very different things, right? So, and I think, and Tyler, to that point, we cannot overstate the importance of a renewed USMCA CUSMA deal. Like we can't. And again, so realistically, it sounds like parties are, coming to the table in good faith, want to get this done. And really, to me, it does feel a little bit like walking on eggshells until the review and renewal is done. I have to look at, okay, so who benefits by everything continuing to be walking on eggshells? Because it does feel a little, like U.S. president likes keeping people on their toes. He likes, deciding that he's going to decide. He likes the volatility. But ultimately, I mean, we have to continue to have jobs, make things, eat, live, etc. And eventually this renewal has to happen or goes into annual reviews and then the volatility sticks around. So I'm not, a political expert to know what the, is it more advantageous to have a deal closer to November? Is it more advantageous to just get it done and call it a win and move on? Like, I'm not sure, but realistically, let's be honest, the U.S. also benefits from this deal. It isn't just about, how important it is to Canada. It's also important to the U.S.
Yeah.
So,
and I get that sense in farm country in the U.S. and from speeches.
Yeah.
Like I yesterday in Minot, there was somebody that was maybe kind of against the idea of free trade, but for the most part, it's like, it's very pro free trade. At least what I have heard from.
Just don't call it free trade, Shaun. We call it integrated supply chains and a trade partnership.
Yeah. So, to that point, I think we're
Bye,
hearing
Tyler.
a lot. See you later, Tyler.
Yeah. I've got to go. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, bye, Tyler.
See ya.
Yeah.
See ya.
Carrying on.
To that point, though, I think a lot of people are saying like the free trade as we knew it it's gonna be different going forward. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't think anybody really does for the most part, but it is going to be it is going to be different. I think one of the big things for Canada is to try to figure out, can they maintain their current status of not having a blanket tariff across all goods? I think that's one of the main things. We talk about autos and steel and forestry and all those kinds of things, and you can throw in dairy if you want to. I don't know if you even should, but those big ones are the big problems. Across all the other commodities, I think the concern is, do we actually have a blanket tariff, or do we keep our preferential treatment that we have now that Goldie talked about? Kelvin?
I'm increasingly optimistic. I'm more optimistic about the future of USMCA and CUSMA than I have been since Trump came into power.
Heppner and I are on the same page.
Because affordability, protectionism is inflationary. Protectionism drives costs up because you no longer are allowed to buy from the cheapest provider in the world, kind of thing. And so that's where, to me, if there's a focus on affordability, that's good for Canada and trading partners with the U.S. Certainly, supply chains will change where China will be cut out, or there will be attempts to cut China out, and other countries that the U.S. really is battling against. But Canada shouldn't be on the other side of that type of line. So I'm optimistic about where it goes.
I'm right. So I don't want to be like we're a whole bunch of front runners here, but I am actually, I feel the same. I don't know if I've said it on the show. I can't remember half the time, but what I've been telling people in speeches is that I think we've seen a pivot from being totally focused on America first to affordability first. And those are not mutually exclusive. They do overlap. Mm-hmm. Okay. There is an overlap there, but if you lead with affordability, and I use the example of beef prices are high, let's import Argentine and Brazilian beef. That's not America first. That's affordability first. We've got concerns about the price of gas and fuel and price of oil from an affordability standpoint. Boom, let's take out Maduro, and we're going to get this new supply of oil from Venezuela. Okay. That is affordability first. And I think if you are a Canadian lobbyist going to D.C. and you are talking about the benefits of USMCA and CUSMA, you absolutely better, without a doubt, be talking about affordability. If you're not talking about how that trade agreement helps with affordability in both Canada and the U.S., you are a fool and not paying attention to what's actually happening in D.C. politics. And that is, I believe that wholeheartedly, and I agree, Canada's leverage, I think, is actually increased as we've seen this transition.
So for whatever Trump puts on Truth Social or whatever the administration says on the cable TV news shows, ultimately, when push comes to shove, Trump has shown repeatedly that he listens to Wall Street. We're seeing that with the Fed Reserve Chair pick today, and that affordability is the bottom line issue, like you said, where he's compromised on by opening up imports for beef, for example, to keep costs down because when there's too much attention. Or eggs last year was another example when egg prices were too high.
Yeah.
So both those things work in Canada's favor because guess what? Canada's Prime Minister, he knows everybody on Wall Street. He knows central bankers around the world. And that's where Carney, I think, I don't know, is something where I've come to realize maybe he deserves more credit too for how the connection, the relationships he has when it comes to calling up the CEO of Goldman Sachs or Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan or that type of thing, where he knows those guys. And those are the people that Trump listens to as well. So that's where Carney, whatever you think about his domestic policies and the impact his decisions he's having or inaction that's happening domestically, internationally, he has some sway there when it comes to people that work in the U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, Wall Street realm.
And on the China announcement, I think it's pretty clear. My feeling is, I think it's clear the president really doesn't care. He also didn't care about Starmer doing a deal with China either. Actually, he pivoted to Canada and the concern about China taking away hockey from Canadians, which would be an interesting negotiation. But anyway, I think people around Trump care.
Yeah. And I actually think we saw that very clearly was the initial reaction to Carney coming back from China with an agreement, not some sort of big free trade deal, with an agreement to, reduce some tariffs and let some EVs in, et cetera, an agreement. I think Trump's initial reaction was the real one. It was his. It was, yeah, so what? And honestly, on the grand scheme of things, it is kind of, yeah, so what from a U.S. perspective. And then afterwards, after everybody around Trump was like, hey, wait a minute, it does this, that, the other thing, then he came out and saying that this is somehow rude and whatever. So, ultimately, I don't think that Trump cares all that much if Canada has some trade that happens with other countries. I don't think it bothers him at all. Really.
I think Carney did. I think one of the mistakes that Carney did make, though, is how he politicked around the significance of what they actually had agreed. I think he kind of backed that. I think that created that whole Canada-China free trade deal. I think maybe he got a little bit ahead of himself there. Like, hey, we're dealing with these tariffs. We got to find some trade diversification. But again, the
U.S. does that with every single one of their napkin trade deals. This administration,
100%. We are just not in the same. Those are different planes because of the economic power side of it. But you're 100% correct. And I've said this in a lot of U.S. media appearances. What the U.S. negotiated with China back in October is really no different than what Canada negotiated here in January. They're just those aren't that different. So you shouldn't really think of them that way. And hey, the thing is, a lot of those 50,000 cars that are Chinese EVs, potentially if they ever do come to Canada, then there's a big if there, I think, based on Canada's desire for EVs right now. We may not even get close to that TRQ. But if you look at those 50,000 EVs per year, they're likely Teslas, which last time I checked is an American company.
Yeah, they may very well be.
Yeah. Lyndsey, any other takeaways from the webinar?
You know what? So lots actually, or several more. So I do recommend, everybody, it's on our YouTube channel. You can find it on RealAgriculture.com as well. It'll be on the podcast feed. So listen to it. I think the economic stuff that Des puts out, it's really worth a listen. It is really good. And as I mentioned, I think the tech piece of how we're going to do more with less, I didn't have a chance to sort of push back on it. But I think that requires some actual vision and leadership. The one thing that we didn't talk about on today's show that is definitely in there is there were questions that came in about essentially the latitude for governments to potentially do things. This is all sort of centered around, CFIA and the ostrich farm, traceability right now, basically the noise, the backlash, the pushback from people. Yes, largely on social media, but when you, and we didn't get into entirely this sort of bigger picture thing, but we've got, separatists in Alberta, separatists in Quebec. We've got a lot of sort of this pushback against more government intervention on the social media side, et cetera. We do have a pretty large communications gap, and up against misinformation, disinformation, et cetera. There are concerns about when this government, or if this government decides to actually show some leadership on this and lay out, here's our plan, is anyone going to listen? Or are they going to be constantly fighting that misinformation, disinformation? There's a lot at play out there right now that isn't real friendly to any government, let alone a Carney government.
I think there's...
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kelvin. But yeah, so that was one that, like, that's near the end, that discussion, and that probably is its whole, that's like a whole series we could do, everybody. No one's going to listen to it, but we could do it.
We'll get into some of the CFSI numbers next week, but I will.
Very interesting.
Justin and I are going to record here I have 6 straight hours of broadcasting today, by the way.
Okay, so you need honey tea.
Yeah, Justin Funk and I are going to record the results for January, and we had over 500 people fill out the survey in like 48 hours. So you guys are awesome out there that did that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you to each of you. Yeah.
The number that did surprise me above anything is the fact that over 50% of people said that they were really not worried at all about their banking relationship. Mm-hmm. That was stronger than I thought it was going to be. That stuck out to me, and also a huge deterioration, though, at the same time, of people that would describe their financial situation, like their financial assessment. Yeah. So we're taking into consideration the income statement, the balance sheet, just how am I doing financially right now?
Yeah, like where are you at? Yeah.
Down to 35% saying good to excellent.
Yeah.
April, it was 57%, you guys. That number has...
That's a big...
Sorry, it's 37. So, yeah, we dropped 20 points in less than a year. That is concerning. Very concerning. So...
Okay, we'll watch for it.
Okay, well... this has been a real awesome day. A lot of fun. It's so many issues. We could do multiple hours. We're going to sit here and talk for the rest of the day and crack a beer.
Yeah, some of us have work to do, Shaun. We can't just talk.
Hey, you say that like I don't. Okay,
I know, that's why I say it.
This isn't work either, is it?
You were doing a McCann thing. You're doing a McCann. You're McCanning me.
We live pretty close to each other. It's something in the water, probably.
It's like those Ottawa elites, Kelvin.
Yes, that's what it is. It's the bubble. Yeah.
Well, I really do appreciate all the discussion. Appreciate all of our RealAg Radio podcast listeners. We try to do this bonus every Friday, and because we love the bonus so much, we're going to do a double bonus. We're now going to turn it over to my conversation with Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange for the beef market update. Enjoy it, everybody. Let's dig in what's going on in these cattle markets. Here for the beef market update is Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, how are we doing?
I'm good, Shaun. Good to be with you.
It's already the end of January.
Oh my goodness.
We're 1/12 through the year. What happened this week from a price perspective?
Well, as you would expect at this time of the year, and especially heading into February, pretty quiet on the beef front. Cash markets were quiet as well. Now, we still haven't seen a lot of trade in terms of U.S. fed cattle trade. Expectations are kind of steady. So for the record, last week, our 5 area live price was $234.70, and the dress price $368.80. So there will be trade get going, I think, later today. You know, packers are running with smaller kills right now. They've got enough inventory. We were a little bit front end loaded. Cattle are heavy. You know, so we're kind of in that treading water range. And the wholesale market really identifying kind of the same. Last night it closed pretty much steady with a week ago. $367.65, and that select is still pretty tight. It's only $7 back. And again, that's pretty typical through this first quarter where you've got a narrow choice select spread. So as I said, harvest levels are small. Packers are losing money. This is pretty MO, if you will, for what's going on time of year and the conditions we've got out there.
Those packer losses, have they been kind of stable at a loss, or has it been kind of bouncing
stable
around?
At record numbers? Yeah, I guess you could put it that way. They've been because the Fed market's been steady and because the wholesale market's been steady. We're kind of, like I say, treading water. And Shaun, as you mentioned at the top of the call, we're heading into February. That's not beef demand's best time to shine, if you will. I still think, I'm still expecting that as we get into spring, but February is what February is. So that's kind of what it is. Just wanted to kind of update listeners on last Friday's U.S. January 1 cattle on feed report. And again, kind of same trend we saw, especially through the second half of last year. On feed numbers to start off the year are down 3% compared to last year. This is the smallest January 1 on feed total since 2017. So again, just identifying with that. December placements were down 5% and December marketings were up 2%. So pretty much as expected, as the trade guesses were coming into the report. So that's out of the way. But what we have to, go ahead, Shaun.
Well, I was just going to say, okay, so based on the fact we have such a low number of cattle on feed, that ties to, we shouldn't expect a big drop in beef prices at the restaurant or the grocery store, at least in the short term, because this supply equation is really not changing in this part of the cycle.
No, and we've got such a lag time, right?
Yeah.
So
it takes a long time to turn the ship.
So, I think you hate to kind of go out there and stick your nose out too far in retail beef prices, but for the first half of this year, I just, maybe they've stopped going higher. We'll wait and see when we get a couple more data points out, but it is what it is for a bit. So the other report that's going to come out and help us understand supply better going into 2026 is the U.S. cattle inventory report for January 1st. So that's due out this afternoon. So we'll wait and we'll talk about, what it actually was. But we always get these pre-report guesses ahead of these reports. So in a nutshell, Shaun, not a lot of expectation for not a lot different than a year ago. So yeah, it certainly looks like the cow herd has stopped declining, but the growth looks mild. So the guesses right now, total cattle and calves are expected to be unchanged from a year ago, or just up a tad. Beef cow numbers also unchanged. Very mild heifer retention expected in this report at up 2%. So yeah, a little bit like we've all been expecting, but certainly not aggressive heifer retention is what we think this report's going to say. Now, just again, as a reminder, these inventory reports are not what I'd call market movers. They're not going to move the futures market on Monday morning, I don't think. But what they tend to do is just give us, that data series to be able to talk intelligently about, here's the state of what's going on in the beef herd size and the state of the numbers. So that's a good confirmation, especially as we're looking at the turn of the cycle, if you will.
Yeah. Next week is CattleCon in Nashville. What do you think we're going to hear out of that meeting? Because that's over 7,000 typical delegates from across Canada, the U.S. and Mexico. Everybody obviously very focused on the beef market. What's going to be the discussion, do you think?
Well, I think there'll still be lots of talk about the unknowns around the Mexican border, because that's such a big piece on the supply story for the U.S. And the border's still closed. It's kind of been quiet on the front lines there for the last little bit. So I suspect there'll be some discussion around those impacts. There certainly is going to be discussion around demand. I mean, 2025, as we talked about at the end of the year, Shaun, was just another record year for beef demand, and that's such a critical piece of the price equation in 26. So I suspect they'll talk a lot about that, and the fact that we're, as this meeting's going on next week, we're probably at or near the absolute smallest supplies of this cattle cycle. So where to from here, and how fast does that move, and or how does it move? And just given all the unknowns on trade, I do think, tariffs and trade are going to have to be part of that discussion next week. So it'll be very interesting to be part of that meeting or listening to see what comes out of the meeting. Yeah.
And if you're a rancher, and provided you have moisture, that's a bit of a caveat here, but if you have moisture, you wish you could snap your fingers and all of a sudden have double the herd size on your ranch, because there's a lot of profit out there for that kind of inventory. But to get to that, it's a time equation when it comes to the beef business.
These are long-term decisions for the rancher, for sure. And we've talked about all of it. And it's not just weather and price, but there's so many other pieces to those decisions. Before we go, Shaun, I did want to circle around back to the local market, because we haven't talked about that. And we did get a couple bucks more for fed cattle prices in Alberta this week. Draft market was up $2 to $5.10 delivered, and the Ontario market was steady this week at $5.30. So wanted to get that out of the way. We also had a StatsCan report yesterday on the November live cattle exports. So we'll just update you there. November fed cattle exports were up 4%. So it was a busy month of fed cattle moving south, if you will, for harvest. Year to date, that number's up 6%. So we kind of been running up on fed cattle exports all year. Cow exports were up 25%. And that's not a surprise because we had one packer in Canada kind of back off on their cow kill in that fourth quarter. And so it shows up in those in those cow exports. So year to date, we're still down 8%, but it was a busy month for cow exports south. November feeder cattle exports, tiny, only 5,000 head. So that was down 24% from last year. And I was going to do a little plug for livestock price insurance in Canada, if that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So just looking at the calendar, things happen quickly. We're going to flip into February next week, and that's when the calf product insurance starts to sell to cover your fall 2026 calf price. So, have a look, just a reminder that, that's next week. So again, I think, February 3rd, the product comes up for sale for calves. I mean, fed cattle and feeder cattle are, for sale year round, but this feeder product's seasonal. So, get back on the email list if you aren't. Have a look at what those strike levels are at and what the premium costs are going to be. And think about it, because we've talked lots about volatility. I don't think we're out of the woods there, and so this may be something to take a look at.
Yeah. Also, the agri-stability point that we've heard from guests on our show here from MNP talking about how, from a rancher perspective, this is a year where really should look at agri-stability. It's something where ranchers have really pushed back in the past. Markets changed, and something you should need to be talking to your account about. Hey, I've got an audience question before we go.
Okay.
So. Last show, we were talking about the amount of feeder cattle imports from the U.S. into Canada. Okay, so U.S. feeder exports into Canada. And we're going to break a record this year, and whether we hit that 500,000, we're going to have to wait to see. The prior record in 2024 was 400, so a significant amount has crossed from the U.S. into Canada. Do we have any idea on the makeup of those? And so I don't have the question in front of me, but one of our audience members heard the beef market update and asked, how many of those are like little dairy calves, or the beef on dairy movement, and how many of those are, more, traditional feeder cattle? I don't know the best way to separate those two, but that was a question from the audience. Any idea?
Yeah, we do. That's not tracked in terms of what class of cattle. We just know they're going into restricted feedlots. But from a seasonal perspective, it in the fall run, there's certainly, so that would have been October's number, and the upcoming number in November would include conventional beef calves in the fall run. For the 12 months of the year, I think there's a pretty static kind of beef on dairy number that does tend to move north, and we've seen it pretty steady. And then in the fall run, we get a much bigger number because you're including the conventional calves. So depends on the time of year. That October number that we reported about a couple calls ago would certainly have included some of both.
Great stuff. And thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Okay, thanks. You too, Shaun.